monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Note that territory is one of the characteristics of the state. Specifically, at the present time, the right to use physical force 1917. I saved this one for last because it's basically the most commonly used, I think, definition of the state that spans multiple disciplines from sociology to political science and so on. So this is Gramsci, what he has to say about the state in Politics as Vocation, written in 1917. He says, "Today, however, we have to say that a state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Note that territory is one of the characteristics of the state. Specifically, at the present time, the right to use physical force is ascribed to other institutions or to individuals only to the extent to which the state permits it. The state is considered the sole source of the right to use violence." So like I said, this definition is incredibly popular, and Weber's concept of the state is essentially that the state is the institution that maintains a monopoly on the use of legitimate violence, and that any institution that has the monopoly in any given society on the use of violence would be considered the state. So this is a really easy one to apply to different societies. If you ever wonder, well, what does the state look like in that society? All you have to do is find the institution that has the monopoly on the use of legitimate violence. So in the United States, that very clearly would be the military and law enforcement. The institutions that control those entities are the state, and you could apply that to any society throughout history. And if there is no entity that has a monopoly on the use of violence, then we might consider that to be a stateless society. And like many of these thinkers have talked about, men and women lived for hundreds of thousands of years without what we would consider to be state. So interesting to think about. So that's sort of a few different quotes from different thinkers on the school of thought that the state is oppressive and exploitative and functions to limit the freedom of the citizens of any society rather than vice versa.
And this is important because the other school of thought that argues that the state is protective is clearly one posed by the core identity group that is won over, right? Because who was it that whose definition included Perpetkin? What is it? Gregory Perpetkin? I'm clearly butchering that name, but Perpetkin was the one who posited that the society is won over, right? And this is not entirely true. The society, or even the majority are complicit. They are people who have been oppressed and beat down to the point that they just go along with it, and it doesn't really interrupt their everyday life, and so they put up with it. They're also born into it, and so the culture of like something pre-existing your existence is what kind of like dictates and dominates whether or not your ideas of like, rebellion. So the desire to oppose something would mean that it has to like interact with your day-to-day life in a way that is very interruptive, that is very constraining, that is very destructive, and immediately so, very immediately so, because you could argue that the state is very destructive just over time, over a long period of time. And so people tend to just become complicit with the state because it's not the evil and the destruction is slow. And as for the core identity group, who is won over, not even won over, they're the ones who are erecting this type of these type of ideas into the mainstream. These are the folks who are the ones in control of these ideas, they have the monopoly on the economy, and they are the ones like running the show, if you may, the people who invented money and the Constitution, the American Constitution, or the constitutions of various states. And these are the group that this is the group that brings about most of the law, and so or the initiators of the law, and the people who come along who amend it are very much the under them. And the people who are most oppressed are the people who have no say in this, right? The ones who it affects, but they're financially restricted, physically restricted from doing anything. And the most destructive part about this is that they could very well topple the state. They could very well have their own ideas implemented. Disabled people could very well make accommodations everywhere, but there's just not enough people who are making a concerted effort. And this is one of the unfortunate things, because people just refuse to come together if it doesn't affect them. And so you have to appeal to things like people's emotional capacity before getting them to do anything about your plight. It has to also be something egregiously outrageous and disturbing, that makes people think that, oh, this could also happen to me, or it taps into their like empathy. But the group who is won over is arguably not won over. They are the deciders, and the other group who are underneath them, the middle class, for example, are the ones who are complicit. They're busy making money. They're busy, and the paperwork and the amount of work that the state forces these people to go through in order to exact what it is that they want is just too overwhelming.